Hello and welcome. This is Calvin's Common Sense Crusade with me, the Reverend Calvin Robinson, on your TV, online and on your wireless. Today we will be discussing the treatment of Christians in India after a horrific video emerged showing 2 women being subjected to truly shocking violence. Parent coach Anna Friedman will be joining me to talk about the risks of children having phones in school following the UN's new education report. And Ollie London will be here to discuss the world's aquatics decision to start an open category that will be inclusive to all transgender athletes. And in the duel, my panelists will be discussing if pubs should change their name in support of stopping breeding of pedigree dogs. Emma, in a few seconds, what will your take be?
No, this is stupid.
And Andrew?
I have to disagree. It is totally stupid. I think it's absolute nonsense.
But before all of that, it's the news with Polly Middlehurst. The Vice President of Programmes at PETA, P-E-T-A, sent a letter to the Old Bulldog pub group asking them to rename their pub to the Old Mutt, in the belief that this move will help avoid promoting deformed, flat-faced dogs and instead help promote mixed-breed dogs who are healthier and live longer. The letter concluded with PETA offering a contribution to any cost in order to change the name and signs at the pub. So should the pub change its name from the Old Bulldog to the Old Mutt? All of which brings me to tonight's duel. Does the name of the pub, the Old Bulldog, really promote breeding of pedigree dogs? Joining me now are my duelists, Emma Webb, UK Director of the Common Sense Society, and Andrew Eborn, a futurist and lawyer. Andrew, futurist.
Absolutely, and I knew you were going to say that. So what we do, we work around the world helping companies ascertain what the opportunities are and the threats for the things in the future. I talk a lot about AI, I talk about technology on that sort of basis. Talk about changing pub names and why it's so bad on that sort of basis. Because if you look at the history of pub names, it all goes back to the Romans, who used to distinguish what a pub or a place where you could have a glass of wine was, as opposed to a general residence. And they used to put little vine leaves up to indicate that. When they came over to Britain, obviously vine leaves were not so prominent, so they would get a bush. And they would put that up, which gave rise to names such as the bush and the bird in the bush and so on and so forth. It then changed in 1393. There was an Act of Parliament when King Richard II made it compulsory that you would have a pub identified by a sign. And so you would then get things like the crown, because they wanted to be loyal to the king. You'd have things like the red hart, the white hart, the red lion, all sorts of things, the heraldry. That's where it all came from. So the old dog, not just about dog fighting, but it's a reference to that. It'd be a bit about heraldry. Things like the cock, which is that they have on a numbered sort of place like that, was actually about cockfighting. So you'd have to look at all the pubs and change it on that sort of basis. But the sign is an essential part of the British pub, and we shouldn't be messing with it.
I'm with you.
Oh, man.
Thank you.
Thank you. There we go.
This is not really much of a duel.
I love that bit of history there. But this pub in particular, Emma, was named because of the owner. Well, he was inspired by his rescue dog. He has a bulldog that he rescued, so he named it after his dog. Do you think it's promoting the rescuing of bulldogs? Do you think PETA could be right?
No, I just think this is so stupid. They're petty busybodies, and it's something about it is so sort of arrogant and churlish and disrespectful to the owner of the pub. Even the way that the letter is addressed to him is just so disrespectful. Firstly, like you say, there's an origin story behind this name, and we've seen that PETA are obviously hooking themselves onto this trend that we've seen with Black Lives Matter, where people will try to bully a pub into changing its name because it's regarded as offensive. They've managed to come up with some way in which this is offensive in relation to animal rights, and now they're trying to bully this pub into, you know, saying that if you don't do this, then you're promoting the bad breeding of animals. I love animals. I also have concerns about breeding, but it's also, I think we have to recognise that they've gone for the bulldog, and look at that beautiful bulldog there. This is a national symbol of British identity. So they've just happened to pick on a pub name that isn't just a dog that may have some breeding issues, but also a dog that is symbolic. It's associated with who? Churchill, somebody else who has been attacked by the Vandals and iconoclasts in relation to other progressive movements. So I think that this is disingenuous nonsense from them, and they need to be treated like children. They need to be told no in the way that you would tell a child no.
Yeah, absolutely. Andrew, I'm glad Emma touched on that because they've also called the Churchill dog retired as well. And it's not just the insurance company. It is, like Emma says, it's a British institution.
Absolutely. And what's interesting as well, and it doesn't just stop there, this whole wokery, because they tried to change the ploughman's lunch in a pub in Dartmouth, and they wanted to call it the plough person's lunch because they thought it would be... I know, it's wonderful stuff, isn't it? It has to stop. The plough people. I love the alliteration, though. You can have a postman, a post person, all these sort of things. It makes
all those modern ploughwomen so offended. A
person hole as opposed to a manhole, all those things. I think we have to... There is a serious issue. The serious issue is sometimes the inbreeding of dogs. It is... and if you look at the history of the bulldog, that's what tended to be happening. It tended to be... Some of it was fairly cosmetic as to why they did it. And a lot of these dogs, which have very snuffed noses, it's basically very difficult for them to breathe. And you have similar with cats. We adore cats and all sorts of animals, but they've been bred in a certain way, which are for cosmetic reasons. And I think you're right to look at that. Is that the right sort of
And it's cruel. It's cruel. I mean, some of these animals, they can't exercise. Their health is impacted by this. And the point that they make that, you know, a mutt will live longer. It's just, but that, you know, maybe they're trying to use this as a way of raising some attention for their cause. But it's clearly a disingenuous attack on this pub, trying to basically bully and pressure them into changing the name away from something that, and if you as you mentioned, you know, the historic basis of pub names. Part of this is the erasure of history. This is erasing our ability to meet our history in our daily life. Some of these pub names are ancient.
Oh, absolutely.
They go back to periods of time where they didn't even have the names written on the pubs. It would have just been an image. In the case of this particular pub, as you mentioned, Calvin, you know, this has it's a modern history, but it's a good distinctive reason for that pub name. And I think that PETA just need to keep their noses
You
out
mustn't
there.
rewrite history. And the reason for a lot of the pub signs originally was because illiteracy was obviously enormous. So in order to identify, you had these particular pictures. And what tends to happen, they tend to follow particular things, whether it's hunting or they follow heraldry. The reason we have, I think there was 150 families that have a red lion as part of their emblem. So what then happens is we have about 600 pubs called the Red Lion because it followed that sort of stuff. But calling it the old mutt is deliberately derogatory, isn't it? It's sort of where you go for hair of the dog, deliberately. You work on that sort of principle. So it has to be wrong. PETA do some great jobs, but I think this is not going to help their cause.
Can we just remind ourselves that PETA are the same people who wanted to replace to kill two birds with one stone, to feed two birds with one scone.
Oh, my God.
With one scone?
That's how seriously we should take
They called it a scone as opposed to a scone? That's outrageous.
I think that's just Emma. So they're not actually animal rights activists at this point, though, are they? Because they're not protecting animals like this. This is true.
They're radical. And like I say, I love animals. I care about animal rights. I don't want animals to be bred in a way that makes them suffer and makes them live shorter lives. But PETA they're so radical in some of the suggestions. It's not radicalism so much as just silliness. It's very difficult to take them seriously. And just like Just Stop Oil are doing damage to the cause that they're trying to put forward, as many environmentalists recognise actually on their own side, so too are PETA, I think, doing damage to the cause of animal rights, because there are many people who won't be on their side because they're being so silly.
No, you're absolutely
Whereas
right.
actually the great British public love animals.
Yes.
We would be totally on their side if they weren't alienating people with stupid suggestions like this.
And that has to be an essence of anybody trying to communicate and persuade people, because it's actually the honey that is more sort of effective than the stick, isn't it? And you work on that sort of basis because a lot of people, as you rightly say, they alienate people. Just Stop Oil is a classic example. I don't know anybody out there who's not part of the Just Stop Oil thing who would support their actions. They might support, hang about, you need to look at certain of the issues, but doing it in this way actually is backfiring. And I think PETA have got the same problem. And I think if you talk about the sensible thing about breeding, talk about how it's bad for the animals and so on and so forth, but don't go changing our heritage.
You make a fair point, because PETA are known for trolling people online, especially on social media, almost to the point, you could say, of bullying and harassment. And I don't think that wins people over to your cause.
George or not war, shed more light and less heat, and you might persuade people.
And Emma, we heard similar things. I mean, I do think this is virtue signaling. You know, the pub used to be called the Sea Lion, and I don't think anyone would say that's promoting the breeding of sea lions. So it's it's a ridiculous suggestion. But I remember on Nana's show on this same bar, maybe a year or two ago, when we were talking about the black cock being petitioned to be renamed because the word black was in it, therefore it was racist, even though it's clearly.
I think there was a pub name that was called something like I'm not going to say it because it could be regarded as a swear word if there are children watching, but the black female dog.
Yes, I do remember that, yeah.
And that, I think that was
there was an outrage about that
yeah.
sort of stuff. That's right.
So in a way, I don't really agree with having changed it from the original Sea Lion because I like things to be kept the same.
But it also happens with street names and things like that. You look at some of the medieval street names, which I won't repeat here because they definitely would have problems with Ofcom. But look at what they were called, and it all reflected what tended to happen in those back alleys.
Black Boy Lane and
all those sort of things, and also worse things about other things. But people can Google it, they can have a look. But this is what you've got to be careful of. I think it's wrong to do. People are wrong, and they're doing themselves a disservice.
Wonderful debate there. Thank you very much. I say debate. Thank you very much. Plenty more to come this evening on my Common Sense Crusade. Next, we'll be joined by Daniel McKinney to discuss the gut-wrenching video that shows 2 Christian women being abused and assaulted in India. Plus, a parent coach, Anna Friedman, will be with us to tell us more on the risks of children having phones in schools. See you soon. Two KUKI women have been assaulted in Manipur, India, in the latest example of Christians across the world being subjected to gruesome violence. A horrifying video has emerged showing the naked Christian women weeping, wincing in pain, and begging their attackers to show some mercy. Following the video's emergence, India has been put under the spotlight, and it has raised huge questions about the failure of the state. The police say they have opened a case of gang rape and arrested a man, adding that others will be held soon. Prime Minister Modi said the incident had shamed India and that no guilty will be spared. Andrew, I know you've seen the video. What were your impressions?
Well, it was absolutely horrendous. I did watch it. It was harrowing, was the word. You see this. And Modi was right to call it out and say, look, nobody who's been guilty of these things will go free. So you need to look at these sort of things. My concern, as you rightly pointed out, was it took from May, several months ago, several weeks ago, for this suddenly to become public. And I think they should have controlled the narrative early on. It is deplorable what happened. Absolutely harrowing. And disgusting is the word I would use.
Yeah, and Andrew makes an interesting point. I think the only reason it's gone viral is because India lifted their ban on the internet for a brief period. You know, they suppressed free speech over there and free press. Do you think that's part of the problem?
Well, I think Modi didn't do anything until this went viral. I think it was something like 70 days. And I read that, I haven't watched the full video because I don't want to, but I read that in the video, I think one of the women in the video said that that the police actually handed the women over to the mob. And so this is some kind of ethnic tribal conflict where essentially one group, the Christian group, seem to have taken the hills and the other group have taken the valley. And I think these women are believed to have been fleeing from their village that was set on fire when they were surrounded by another violent mob who then took them off and everything that you've just described. This is something, the persecution of Christians worldwide is something that has been going on for a very long time. And people like Baroness Caroline Cox, particularly been trying to raise awareness of what's been happening in Nigeria, to very little avail, actually, because there's not very much interest in these stories. And I think one of the reasons why we don't pay enough attention here in the West, I did a documentary not that long ago for ADF International, which is a Christian legal organisation, and through that did an interview with a couple that had fled from Pakistan because they'd been imprisoned and put on with a death sentence. They managed to be sort of extradited away to a safe European country. But for a long time, they were on death row for charges of blasphemy against them. And the situation in Pakistan is also awful, with mobs attacking villages and so on. And what came out of the interviews that I did for that was that here in the West, it seems that there is very little interest in Christian persecution worldwide, because we've got it into our heads that Christianity has some kind of hegemony in Western countries, and Christianity is privileged and therefore Christians can't suffer persecution, when the reality is that Christians are the most persecuted group worldwide. This is happening in so many countries. And I'm glad that this video has gone viral, not least because it's forced the Indian authorities to pay attention, because the Supreme Court in India basically said, if to the government, if you don't do something about this, then we'll have to. The fact that this has gone viral, the fact that this is getting at least some attention in the West, not as much as it should be, I hope will make people pay attention to groups like Open Doors, like ADF, like Christian Concern, who have been trying to highlight these issues for a very long time, because it's not just the Indian government that is turning a blind eye to this horrific persecution, this sort of ethnic cleansing, religious genocide that's taking place in, a number of countries. But it's also here in the West, we're just turning a blind eye to it. We're not paying any attention.
Andrew, do you think it's a lack of political appetite?
I think there's a couple of things. What happens in the news cycle is we shine our spotlight on one horrible incident and we tend to move on. What I would say in this incident is we must absolutely ensure that the pressure's kept on. So Modi does what he says he's going to do, and to basically stop. It doesn't matter what the reasons were that it was sparked, you can understand those reasons, but this is unacceptable on any basis. And it's not just about Christians, there are other various terrible ways and terrible things that are happening. I think that's what we need to do. As a news organisation, we need to make sure that we continue to shine a spotlight to make sure that these things don't happen in the future, and that there is actually those people are brought to justice, to discourage people ever going down this route again for anybody.
I think that's a good challenge. Let's have a bookmark on that topic and let's bring this back up on the Common Sense Crusade at some point in the future and find out what has actually been done by the Indian government. But I think Emma raises the wider point in that this isn't just India. This is across the globe. And we don't seem to have any avenue for us in England to help in these countries. We're all about bringing over Islamic refugees and helping countries that aren't Christian, but we don't have a prioritisation for helping and bringing over Christians that need support.
There is no joined-up thinking, and actually this is one of the reasons why I think that we need to have better controls on migration, not to sort of diverge onto a different subject, but we need to be prioritising people who really need to be here. There are people who are being persecuted for blasphemy in Pakistan. There are people who are having their entire villages set on fire. I think it's 140 people, mostly from that Christian tribe, that have been killed in this ethnic conflict that's taking place in Manipur. We need to be prioritising people who really need our help, who really need to be taken somewhere that is safe. And we can't do that if our resources are stretched and overburdened. So when people make the argument that those who want to have controls on our borders and better sovereignty over our migration system, that is coming from a place of, as the Archbishop of Canterbury has said, a lack of compassion. They're wrong. We need to be helping the people who really need us, and we need to have joined up thinking so that we can pressure those countries where this is happening to pay some attention to it, and to make sure that the pressure is constantly kept on them so that this can't happen.
But it's also not just leaving their home, though. It's not just about immigration. It is basically they should be safe to stay in their homes, and that's why we need to shine a spotlight on it.
Thank you both very much. That was Emma and Andrew. Plenty more to come this evening on my Common Sense Crusade. Next, we'll be talking to a parent coach, Anna Friedman, on the risks of children having phones in schools. Plus, stick around to hear from Ollie London on his newest book, Gender Madness. Back in a few. Welcome back to the Common Sense Crusade with me, the Reverend Calvin Robinson, on your TV, online and on your wireless. While technology undeniably offers numerous benefits, it also presents potential hazards, especially when young people are involved. The UN's latest education report warns that allowing access to mobile phones in schools introduces risks, including distraction, disruption, bullying and abuse, and can be detrimental to learning. Yet others countered that mobile phones were useful for contacting parents, seeking to strike a balance between connectivity and safeguarding of children's well-being. So should or shouldn't children have phones in schools? Andrew, we know that there's an offloading of memory here, so we don't retain as much knowledge if we know it's at our fingertips in our smart devices. We also know that these devices are addictive, and we know that they can block children having dreams, and they interrupt our thought processes, and we know that children who have these devices get lower grades, and have lower self-esteem. So is there any reason we should be allowing them?
What I love about this programme is it's shining more light and less heat on the topic. And actually, if you get both sides of the argument together and say, look, why do you need a phone? And some of the things about safeguarding, so you make sure you have a phone when you're on your bus going home to make sure your parents can make sure you get home safely. That's very, very important. Do you need one in the classroom? Well, some teachers will say that they use it as part of the lesson. So in music and so on and so forth, you can do that. They're saying about blocking it in the playground. And the problem is, most people now, I always say that the more means of communication we have, the less we're able to communicate. Because you have your heads down on your screen, it's used for bullying, where it used to be when we were at school, and you didn't have the technology to do that, but you close your door and you're safe. Now this follows you everywhere.
It's like having strangers in the playground.
Absolutely. You've got to be really careful. But what we have to work out is to encourage new skills of communication. And if you use rather like AI, which is basically helping people write their essays and so on and so forth, so you want people to become orators. I mean, one of the policies that they talk about is actually getting people to be able to communicate is really, really powerful. So I wouldn't block it altogether. I would work out when do you need it, maybe as part of your education or for safeguarding on the way home, and find that solution. In the same way as when you go to the O2 for certain gigs now, you have to hand in your mobile phone so you don't record the material with comedians or whatever it's going to be on that sort of basis.
Can I come in very quickly on this suggestion that smartphones can be used during lessons? Because in the Guardian article on this, and they made a point that, you know, not every child has access to it, and so you shouldn't use things in class that the school isn't providing. But two of the examples that were given for how phones are used in classrooms, I thought were just very strange. So one of the benefits apparently is that when the teacher writes something down on the whiteboard, the child can just snap it on their phone and they have the information there. Well, they're not writing it down and it's not going into their brain if they're just snapping it on their phone. And I very often do that with things to sort of like bookmark it for later, and then I forget to even come back to it. Another use that you could have is in music lessons, using it as a dictaphone so that you can record music or whatever. The schools should provide dictaphones if they need dictaphones. They should not require children to have a device like a smartphone in order to do that.
And everybody has to have access. You've got to be absolutely right.
Preach. Thank you very much. I'd like to give a special thanks to my duelists, Emma Webb, UK Director of Common Sense Society, and Andrew Eborn, futurist and lawyer.